They gave us 72 hours to unmake a home. Admiral Kalen Vance watched the ultimatum timer burn in the corner of the main tactical display. Its crimson digits cycled with a cold, serene indifference that felt more insulting than any screamed threat. Below it, the planet Vero hung like a sapphire teardrop in the void, a nascent world of impossible green and blue now hostage to the monolithic obsidian wedge of the Cairn Mandate dreadnought. The ship named Unwavering Verdict, according to the single arrogant transmission they had sent, was flanked by a dozen razor-sharp cruisers, a perfect blockade of absolute authority. Humanity was new to this part of the Orion Arm, but the Cairn were not. 71 hours, 42 minutes standard. The synthesized voice of Nomos, the fleet's logic core, announced. The AI's tone was as flat as the vacuum outside the carrier threshold's bridge. The Cairn fleet maintains absolute formation, no deviations. They are broadcasting the mandate's ultimatum on all system-wide frequencies. Comply with evacuation, or the colony will be rendered sterile. Vance ran a hand over his jaw, the slight rasp of stubble a grounding human sensation against the sterile perfection of the command deck. Compliance is not an option, Nomos. We don't abandon our own. The words were for the crew as much as for the AI. He could feel the tension in the air, a palpable static of controlled fear and simmering resolve. Every officer on the bridge was a study in stillness, their focus absolute. This is the cost of reaching for the stars. Commander Eva Rostova. His executive officer stepped beside him, her gaze locked on the tactical display. Her posture was ramrod straight, a reflection of her unyielding spirit. They're confident, Admiral. Arrogant. They haven't even deployed a full combat screen. They expect us to turn tail. Their doctrine is their weakness, Vance murmured. Ultimatum compliance or erasure. No room for negotiation, no tolerance for dissent. They've never had to learn another way. He straightened, his voice ringing with quiet authority across the bridge. Then, our first duty is to teach them. A young ensign sat at a monitoring station in the civilian convoy section, her headset pressed tight against her ear. She was listening to the unencrypted chatter from the colony ships, a stream of worried whispers and hymns. On her personal screen, she had a live feed from the Star Wanderer, a family transport. A little girl with wide, curious eyes was pressed against a viewport, her breath fogging the reinforced glass. "Mommy," the girl asked, her voice a tiny, clear bell. "Why are the pointy ships angry at us? They will learn that humanity does not fold." Vance watched the patrol routes of the Cairn cruisers, their movements a perfect, predictable ballet of intimidation. They moved with the flawless precision of a system that had never been challenged, never been forced to improvise. Their power was immense, but it was a brittle strength forged in the fires of dogma rather than the chaos of true conflict. He saw the trap within their strategy, the fatal assumption that their will was irresistible. It was time to introduce them to a different kind of power. Nomos run a full spectral analysis of their drive signatures, Vance commanded. "I want to know everything. Heat dissipation, energy cycling, resonance frequencies. Find the seams in their perfection." "Already in progress," Admiral the AI responded. "Initial findings suggest an unusually high degree of energy coherence across their entire fleet. Their power distribution is uniform, almost unnaturally so. The ledger of this confrontation will be written in light." Rostova's eyebrow arched slightly. "Uniform. For ships of different classes, that's not efficient." The hum of the ship's inertial dampeners was a constant low thrum beneath their feet, a reminder of the immense energies being held in careful check all around them. "It is as if they're drawing from a single networked source," Vance mused, a flicker of an idea taking root. They're not a fleet of individuals. They're a single weapon system. He turned to his sensor chief, Lieutenant Jian Li. Li, I want you to focus your deep-range sensors on the dreadnought. Look for carrier waves, something that would allow that kind of energy sharing. It might be subtle. The lieutenant's fingers danced across his console, the holographic display shimmering in the low light of the bridge. Aye, Admiral, searching for the strings on the marionettes. We will show them the strength in mercy. The Cairn hailed them again, not with a voice, but with a data packet. It was a sterile, automated message identical to the first with an updated timestamp. The countdown continued, a silent, screaming clock that defined the edges of their reality. They weren't dealing with a hostile commander. They were arguing with a protocol. It was like trying to reason with a landslide. Vance felt a cold knot of anger tighten in his gut, but he pushed it down. Anger was a luxury he could not afford. They're not listening, Rostova stated, her voice tight. They won't even acknowledge our presence beyond the ultimatum. They don't have to listen to our words, Vance replied, his eyes narrowing as a plan began to coalesce. They will listen to our actions. A mystery, hidden in plain sight, demands to be solved. Hours bled into one another. The crew of Task Force Aegis worked with a quiet, focused intensity that was the hallmark of their training. They were not a fleet of conquest. They were a rapid response unit, specialists in de-escalation crisis management, and when necessary, creative defiance. Every ship in the small task force, the carrier Threshold, the electronic warfare frigate, Ghost, and the twin escort destroyers Steadfast and Guardian, was a tool designed for a specific purpose. Vance stood before the main holotable where Nomos had projected a shimmering three-dimensional map of the Kepler 186 system. The Cairn fleet was a cluster of angry red icons. The human convoy, 22 civilian ships full of pioneers and dreamers, was a huddle of green tucked behind the relative safety of Vero's largest moon. The plan is not to break their blockade, but to make it irrelevant, Vance explained, his voice calm and steady. They expect a frontal assault or a desperate high-velocity run. We will give them neither. His finger traced a path around the system's massive gas giant, a swirling behemoth of hydrogen and helium. We will use the gravimetric shear and sensor shadow of the planet to mask our true movements. We do not break the wall. We build a door. We'll deploy a fleet of decoys, Rostova added, picking up the thread. Loaded with our most advanced signal repeaters. They'll mimic our drive signatures, our heat blooms, everything. We'll make them think we're attempting a flanking maneuver here on the far side of the system. The console next to her chirped the low hum, a confirmation of the decoy drones being prepped in the Threshold's cavernous launch bays. Nomos interjected, its synthesized voice cutting through the quiet confidence. The probability of the Cairn Command AI being deceived by standard decoys is 63%. However, their doctrine prioritizes overwhelming force against any perceived threat. They will likely divert a significant portion of their fleet to intercept. Exactly, Vance said with a thin smile. And when they do, they will have turned their backs on the real prize. Their certainty is a cage of their own making. Lieutenant Li's voice suddenly cut through the bridge chatter, sharp and urgent. Admiral, I have something. The energy resonance. It's not just a network. It's a closed loop. The dreadnought is acting as a central power capacitor for the entire fleet. The cruisers are drawing from it directly through a focused energy transfer beam. He highlighted the faint, almost invisible streams of power connecting the ships on the tactical display. It's incredibly efficient, but it's also a single point of failure. Vance's smile widened. The mystery was revealing itself. A single cord powering a dozen blades. And what happens, Lieutenant, If we were to introduce a little static on that line, a power fluctuation, even a minor one, would force every ship in their fleet to reboot their primary energy conduits. Lee replied, the excitement clear in his voice. It would cause a system-wide brownout. Shields would flicker. Targeting sensors would go blind for precious seconds. A reckoning is not always about destruction. The pieces were all there, a complex puzzle of risk and opportunity. They had a path, a strategy born not of aggression, but of a deep understanding of their opponent's inflexibility. They would use the Cairn's own rigid doctrine as a weapon against them. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane, but it was a very human kind of insanity. In one of the Threshold's engineering bays, a team of technicians was calibrating a swarm of microsatellites. They were small, no bigger than a fist, with mirrored surfaces that shimmered under the harsh bay lighting. These were the elements of the reflective lattice, the cornerstone of the fleet's defensive and tactical capabilities. They were not weapons. They were tools of misdirection, designed to bend light, to redirect energy, to create illusions on a scale large enough to fool a fleet. A young crewman, barely out of training, paused to wipe sweat from her brow. She looked at the gleaming satellites, her reflection distorted in their curved surfaces. "It's like we're building a ghost," she murmured to her team leader. "Not a ghost," the veteran engineer replied, not looking up from his diagnostic tablet. "A lesson. And class is about to be in session. We teach the unwilling with the language of consequence." 48 hours remaining. Nomos announced, its voice a dispassionate reminder of the stakes. Vance gave the order. "Launch the decoys. Begin the feint. Let's give the mandate something to chase." From the Threshold's launch tubes, a swarm of drones shot out into the void, their engines flaring to life with brilliant blue fire. They accelerated hard, screaming towards the far side of the system, their electronic warfare suites broadcasting the powerful, unmistakable signatures of a Terran battle group on the move. The illusion was perfect. As predicted, the Cairn reacted. Half of their cruiser squadron detached from the blockade and surged to intercept the Ghost Fleet. Their movements were swift, efficient, and utterly predictable. They left a carefully calculated gap in their blockade, just wide enough to be tempting, but positioned in a way that would turn it into a kill box for any ship foolish enough to try it. "They have opened a door, not knowing we built the frame." "They're taking the bait," Admiral Rostova reported, a note of triumph in her voice. The glare from the tactical display cast sharp shadows across her face. "They believe they are in control," Vance said. "They believe they are setting a trap." He watched the red icons of the Cairn cruisers move into their pre-planned positions. "Nomos, prepare the reflective lattice. Target the power conduit between the Dreadnought and the cruiser Iron Resolve." He had chosen the target carefully. The Iron Resolve was positioned at a key anchor point in the blockade, its powerful sensors covering the most direct path to the planet Vero. Blinding it even for a moment was critical. Their strength is their greatest vulnerability. Lattice deployment initiated, Nomos confirmed. A new swarm of icons, tiny silver specks, moved out from the Threshold, flying in a complex, pre-calculated formation. They were almost invisible, their surfaces reflecting the black of space, their emissions negligible. The civilian convoy began to move slowly, at first creeping out from behind the moon's shadow. 22 ships full of families and scientists and engineers began their desperate run for the planet. Their engines glowed with a soft, hopeful light against the oppressive darkness. They were a fragile chain of life, and Task Force Aegis was their only shield. The Cairn ships that remained in the blockade shifted their positions, their weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy. They were ready for the convoy, ready to spring their trap. The tension on the Threshold's bridge was thick enough to taste a metallic tang of ozone and adrenaline. Hold the line for every soul behind us. Lattice in position, Admiral Lee reported, his voice steady despite the immense pressure. Ready to engage. Execute, Vance ordered. The microsatellites of the reflective lattice pivoted in perfect unison. For a fleeting instant, they caught the distant light of the star Kepler 186, and for a moment, a new constellation of impossible brightness bloomed in the void. Then they focused. A precisely aimed beam of concentrated solar energy, gathered and amplified by hundreds of mirrors, shot across the darkness and struck the invisible power transfer beam connecting the Kirin dreadnought to its cruiser. It was not an attack. It was a disruption. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the Kirin network. Every chain has a weakest link. On the tactical display, the icons for the entire Kirin blockade flickered. The iron resolve went dark for 3 critical seconds. Its shields collapsed. Its sensors went blind. Its weapon systems automatically initiated a hard reboot. The carefully constructed kill box had a gaping temporary hole in it. The door is open. Rostova breathed. Convoy, all engines ahead full. Burn for the atmosphere. The 22 civilian ships surged forward, their drives flaring to maximum output. They poured through the gap in the Kirin line, a river of light and hope. The Kirin were in disarray. Their comm channels, monitored by the Ghost, exploded into a cacophony of frantic, confused status reports. They had been so certain of their superiority, so wrapped in the dogma of their doctrine, that they had never considered such a tactic. They planned for a battle, but we gave them a lesson in geometry. But the Kirin were not fools. They recovered quickly. The commander of the Unwavering Verdict, its systems already back online, realized it had been deceived. Its response was not tactical, it was punitive. A ripple of energy ran down the length of the massive dreadnought. It wasn't targeting the fleeing convoy or the human fleet. It was aiming at the planet. Admiral Lee shouted, "They're firing a disciplinary volley, not to destroy, but to make a statement. They're aiming for high orbit to show they can strike the planet whenever they wish." Vance's jaw tightened. This was the true test of their doctrine. A show of force meant to terrorize, to break the will of the colonists below. "We do not answer terror with terror," Nomos Vance said, his voice dangerously calm. "The lattice is still in position. Can we intercept that volley? Affirmative." The AI replied instantly. "The energy output is within manageable parameters for redirection." A series of complex calculations flashed across the main screen, lines of light and vectors converging. However, the optimal target for redirection carries a high risk of escalation. Redirecting the volley back at the dreadnought's weapon emitters would be a clear act of aggression. Rostova looked at him, her eyes burning with intensity. "We have to, sir. We have to show them we have teeth." Vance shook his head slowly. The conflict triangle was clear in his mind, his morality. Nomos's cold calculus, the Kirin's brutal doctrine. A direct hit was what the Kirin would do. It was what they understood. But he was not here to speak their language. He was here to teach them a new one. "No," he said. "We are not them. Our response will be a mirror, not a sword. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." The thought solidified in his mind, a core principle of their service. They were here to break the cycle of violence, not perpetuate it. "Target their primary sensor array," Vance commanded. "Not the emitters, not the bridge, not the drive. Show them that we can touch them precisely and without malice whenever we choose. Show them that their eye is blind to us." The lattice, a silent web of orbiting mirrors, shifted its angle by a fraction of a degree. As the Kirin dreadnought's angry lance of energy shot across the void, the lattice caught it. For a heart-stopping moment, a river of incandescent power was held bent and reshaped. Then it was returned to sender. The account is balanced not with blood, but with blindness. The redirected beam no longer a wide, intimidating blast, but a focused, needle-thin spike of pure energy struck the unwavering verdict's primary sensor cluster. The array, an intricate and unshielded assembly of delicate instruments, vaporized instantly. The massive Kirin dreadnought, the anchor of their entire fleet, was suddenly and completely blind. On the threshold's bridge, no one cheered. They watched in silent awe. They had not destroyed their enemy. They had disarmed them with their own power. It was a strategic masterstroke, a statement of capability and intent that was more powerful than any weapon. But the cost of the maneuver was not zero. The steadfast one of their escort destroyers had been positioned to guard the lattice's flank. A Kirin patrol cruiser, recovering faster than anticipated, had fired a panicked, unaimed shot. The destroyer's shields had absorbed most of the blow, but not all. Damage report from the Steadfast came the call from the comms officer. Port shield generator is down. Hull breach on decks 4 and 5. Life support is holding. We have wounded but no fatalities. A sensory anchor of reality hit the bridge. A faint, almost imagined shudder ran through the threshold's own deck plates in sympathy. A debt has been paid in steel and sweat. As the convoy successfully entered Vero's atmosphere, descending towards their new home, a new alert flashed on Lee's console. "Sir, I'm picking up something new. The Kirin dreadnought just launched a massive wave of something. They're not ships. They're too small. Drones. Hundreds of them. They're autonomous." Vance stared at the new swarm of red icons flooding the tactical display. The Kirin, blinded and humiliated, had abandoned their rigid doctrine. They had resorted to a messy, chaotic, indiscriminate weapon. They had thrown a tantrum. "They're breaking their own rules," Rostova said, her voice a low growl. "This is beneath them." "They are learning," Vance corrected, his gaze unwavering. "They are learning what it feels like to be challenged, to be afraid." He looked at the swarm of oncoming drones, a mindless wave of pure destruction. The first lesson was over. The second was about to begin. They have discarded their doctrine. Now we will show them ours. Nomos Vance began, his mind already racing, processing the new, more dangerous reality. "Begin decryption on that burst transmission we flagged from the cruiser earlier. I want to know if anyone over there is thinking, not just reacting." "Decryption at 73%, Admiral," the AI replied. The scent of ozone from a nearby power conduit seemed to sharpen a sensory spike in the tense atmosphere. "Preliminary analysis suggests it is not a tactical report. It is a query directed at a restricted Kirin historical archive." Vance's attention snapped to the AI's data stream. A query for what? A moment of processing silence, then the AI's voice returned, carrying a weight of significance that defied its synthesized nature. The cruiser was searching for precedents, specifically protocols for honorable withdrawal in the face of a technologically divergent, non-compliant species. A crack appears in the wall of ideology. Someone on the Kirin side was looking for a way out. A commander who understood that their doctrine had failed, who was now digging through ancient records for an option their current dogma didn't allow. This was the true seam he had been looking for, not in their technology, but in their will. The drone swarm was the last desperate act of a failing strategy. They are divided. Rostova realized, her eyes wide. The command ship is lashing out, but at least one of their cruiser captains is looking for an exit. "Then we must provide one," Vance stated. The path forward was now clear. He had to defeat the mindless drones while simultaneously giving the thinking part of the Cairn fleet a path to retreat without shattering their pride completely. A new, more delicate lesson was required. Brace for the onslaught. The real test has begun. The drone swarm advanced a cloud of dumb metal and simple explosives. It lacked the elegant precision of the Cairn cruisers, but it was a formidable threat through sheer numbers. It was a weapon of rage, not of strategy. They will be on the convoy's descent path in 12 minutes, Nomos calculated. The planetary defense grid is not yet active. The convoy is defenseless. Then we will be their shield, Vance declared. His command was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. He turned to his tactical team, his voice a calm center in the rising storm. Eva, prepare interceptor swarms. Prioritize a defensive screen around the convoy's atmospheric entry corridor. No heroics, just a wall. Aye, Admiral. She confirmed her commands, already snapping across the bridge, a cascade of orders setting the ship's defenses into motion. The deck plates of the threshold began to vibrate with a deeper hum as missile tubes were loaded and energy banks charged. We will hold the sky for those on the ground. Lee Vance continued focus all our electronic warfare assets from the Ghost on that drone swarm. I don't want to just jam them. I want to talk to them. Can we find a command frequency, a way to override their simple logic? They're autonomous, sir, but they must have a basic IFF protocol, identify friend or foe. Lee reasoned, his hands a blur over his console. If we can crack that protocol, we can convince them that everything is a foe, or a friend. The idea was audacious. Not just to shoot down the drones, but to hack them, to turn the weapon back on its creator. It was another lesson, this one, in the art of information warfare. A lesson the Cairn, with their rigid top-down command structure, would be ill-equipped to understand. Their weapon will become our classroom. A medical team hustled a wounded crewman from the Steadfast on a gurney through the threshold's hangar bay. The sailor was conscious, his face pale but resolute. He gave a weak thumbs up to a passing engineer. The cost of their defiance was real, written in the strained faces of the medics and the dark, scorched patches on the destroyer's hull. Every soul on the fleet felt the weight of that cost, and it sharpened their resolve. Vance watched the drone swarm approach on the main screen. It was a mindless, angry tide. But behind it was a mind, a commander who had lost control, and another who was searching for a better way. He had to speak to both of them at the same time. Nomos Vance set a new tone in his voice, one of quiet, profound authority. Open a direct channel to the Cairn cruiser that sent the query, the one looking for a way out. No encryption. Plain text. I'm going to send them a message. An open hand can be more powerful than a closed fist. The drones were minutes away. The interceptor missiles were launching a stream of fire and intelligence against a tide of dumb force. The electronic warfare suite of the Ghost was screaming into the void, probing the drone network's simple mind. The fate of the colony. The future of humanity in this sector, and the possibility of a new way of thinking for a rigid empire, all hung in the balance of the next few moments. Vance stood on the bridge of the threshold, a fulcrum point in history, and began to compose his message. It would not be a threat. It would not be a demand. It would be an equation, a simple statement of cost and consequence, a final lesson for a fleet that had never known anything but victory. The universe does not reward dogma. It rewards adaptation. The interceptors met the first wave of drones. The void between the fleet and the planet lit up with a furious, silent storm of explosions. It was a beautiful and terrible sight. Each flash of light was a victory, a life saved, a moment bought. The defensive wall was holding, but it was under immense strain. The sheer number of drones was a relentless grinding pressure. Hull temperature on the Guardian is rising, Rostova reported, her voice strained. They're taking splash damage from the interceptor detonations. Their forward point defense cannons are nearing their thermal limits. The heat shimmer from the destroyer's hull was visible even on the tactical display, a ghostly aura of a ship pushed to its absolute edge. This was the second cost of victory, not in blood, but in heat and stress on the machine of war. Systems could be repaired, but the memory of the strain would remain. We pay the price, but we do not break. Then a breakthrough. "I'm an Admiral Lee," exclaimed, his voice cracking with the effort. "I've isolated their IFF protocol. It's ridiculously simple. A basic challenge response query. We can spoof it. We can tell the entire swarm they are all hostile to each other." "Do it," Vance commanded without hesitation. "Turn their anger inward." The ghost unleashed a torrent of code into the drone network. For a second, nothing changed. The swarm continued its relentless advance. Then chaos erupted. Drones began targeting their neighbors. The mindless cloud of weapons turned on itself, a furious, self-consuming vortex of explosions. What was once a unified threat became a cascading chain reaction of fratricide. Their anger consumes itself. On the Kirin dreadnought, the blinded commander could only watch the disaster unfold on their secondary sensors. Their final desperate move had been turned into a public spectacle of incompetence. Their rage had been used as a tool to dismantle their own weapon. And then Vance's message arrived at the questioning Kirin cruiser. It was not text. It was a simple data packet containing two things. The first was a complete tactical log from the human side of the engagement, showing every move, every decision, every moment of restraint. It was a full accounting, a transparent ledger of their actions. The second was a live feed of the civilian convoy, now safely in Vero's atmosphere, beginning their final descent. The feed showed not soldiers, but families. Children, scientists, the very people the Kirin had been ordered to erase. The truth is the only weapon that never misses. Aboard the Kirin cruiser, insightful inquiry. Captain Vorlog studied the human's message. He saw the decoy feint the precise disruption of the power grid, the non-lethal blinding of his own flagship, and the final elegant reversal of the drone swarm. He saw a strategy of teaching of escalating responses designed to demonstrate capability while minimizing lethality. It was a form of combat his entire culture had deemed inefficient, sentimental, and weak, and it had just completely dismantled a superior Kirin force. Then he watched the feed of the human families, their faces full of hope and relief, and he understood the message. This was not a conquest for the humans. It was an act of creation. They were not fighting for territory. They were fighting for the right to build a home. His orders were to erase a threat. He had been shown there was none. Vorlog made a decision. He opened a channel not to his own enraged and humiliated commander, but to the rest of the Kirin cruiser squadron. He forwarded the human's data packet, adding a single line of his own. The mandate's doctrine is absolute, but the universe is not. Observe the data. The cost of this engagement by our own ledger is a failure. I will not participate in the slaughter of builders. It was an act of unprecedented rebellion, a mutiny born of logic, and a sudden shocking moment of clarity. One by one, the other Kirin cruisers that had been sent on the decoy chase responded. Their weapon systems powered down. Their engines shifted to a neutral state. They had seen the same data, and they had come to the same conclusion. They chose reason over rage. The commander of the unwavering verdict was now truly alone, blind and abandoned by his own subordinates. His rage was impotent. His ultimatum was a hollow echo in a system that no longer listened. His only remaining weapon was the threat of his own self-destruction, an act of spite that would serve no purpose. Vance watched the Kirin cruisers power down their red icons on the tactical display, turning a neutral yellow. The battle wasn't over, but the war of ideas had been won. He had held to his principles. He had taught, not destroyed. He had offered a mirror, and a part of his enemy had been brave enough to look into it. Nomos Vance said, his voice quiet but resonant. Send one final message to the Kirin dreadnought. No threats, no demands, just the current fuel and life support status of his ship. A final lesson in the cold math of survival. The data streamed across the void. The dreadnought was powerful, but it had expended enormous energy. Its life support could last for weeks, but its fuel for a return to Kirin space was now borderline. Its options were dwindling, stripped away not by cannon fire, but by its own strategic blunders. The clock was no longer on Vance's wall. It was now in the Kirin commander's heart, ticking down to an inevitable lonely end unless he too chose to learn. The choice was his. The ultimatum had been returned. The silence on the threshold's bridge was heavier than any armor. Every officer watched the lone blind dreadnought waiting for a response. The ultimatum timer on the main screen had been replaced by a simple running clock, marking the passage of time in a standoff defined by human patience. The air was thick with the scent of recycled air, and the low, steady hum of the life support systems, a sound that had become the fleet's own heartbeat. The Kirin commander had been offered a choice: a lonely, pointless vigil, or the quiet acknowledgement of a paradigm he could no longer control. His answer came not in words, but in a surge of energy that made every sensor on the bridge scream. A shattered pride is the most dangerous weapon of all. It's not weapons fire, Lee reported, his voice tight with alarm. It's the drive core. He's deliberately overloading it. He's going to scuttle the ship. Rostova's expression hardened. Let him. A final act of spite. It changes nothing. Negative Commander Nomos interjected, its synthesized voice suddenly chillingly urgent. A new countdown timer appeared on the screen, this one stark white. The energy release from a dreadnought-class core detonation at this proximity will not be a simple explosion. It will be a sterilizing wave of radiation and plasma. The magnetosphere of Vero is not strong enough to shield against it. The colony will be scoured from the surface. The bridge crew froze. They had won. They had saved the convoy. And now they were all going to die with the enemy they had so carefully, so precisely spared. Their defeat will be our annihilation. Vance stared at the white timer. 10 minutes until detonation. 10 minutes until his victory became the ultimate tragedy. He could order the fleet to scatter, to run, but the colony was a fixed point. He had told Nomos they did not abandon their own. That line was about to be tested by the very laws of physics. His ultimatum was compliance or erasure. Vance said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. He has simply chosen the second option for all of us. The conflict was no longer tactical. It had become elemental. The Kirin commander, a true believer in a doctrine of absolute power, could not conceive of a world where his will was denied. If he could not enforce his authority, he would unmake reality itself. It was the last, most insane expression of the ultimatum doctrine. If you do not bend to my power, then power itself will cease to have meaning. A lesson must be given even at the end of all things. All ships, Rostova began, her command instincts taking over, prepare for emergency warp jump. "Belay that order," Commander Vance cut in his voice sharp as broken glass. He turned away from the terrifying countdown and looked at the holographic model of the reflective lattice, the swarm of tiny mirrors still holding their precise formation. They had been a tool of misdirection, then a lens for a precise, non-lethal strike. Now they had to become something more. He wants to make a statement with energy. We'll answer in kind. Admiral Nomos stated flatly, there is no known defense against an energy release of this magnitude. The force of the detonation will exceed the output of a small star. The probability of fleet survival is 0.01%. The probability of colony survival is 0. Then we must change the equation. Nomos Vance replied, his eyes gleaming with a desperate, brilliant light. We can't block it. We can't absorb it. But maybe, just maybe, we can shape it. We will build a cage of light around his fire. Down on the surface of Vero, the first of the colonists had stepped out onto the rich, dark soil. The air was sweet with the scent of alien pollen and fresh water. A young family stood at the edge of the nascent settlement, the father holding his daughter on his shoulders. She pointed a tiny finger up at the sky at the new, unnaturally bright star that was the overloading Kiern dreadnought. "Look, Daddy," she said, her voice full of wonder. "Another sun." Vance's plan was born of that same fundamental human instinct to see a destructive fire and think not of running, but of building a hearth. "Lee, I want every mirror in the lattice retasked. Not as a weapon, but as a containment field. We're going to build a magnetic bottle. Admiral, the energy required would be astronomical." Lee stammered, running the initial calculations. His console flared with red warnings. "We don't have the power. Not even the Threshold's core can generate a stable enough field. The debt is not owed by us alone." As if on cue, a new communication channel opened. It was a priority signal unencrypted from the Kiern cruiser Insightful Inquiry. Captain Vorlog's voice filled the bridge, strained but resolute. "Admiral Vance, we are reading the energy surge from the unwavering verdict. We understand what our commander intends. This is not an act of war. It is an act of desecration." A pause, then the Kiern captain spoke the words that would change everything. "My squadron's power conduits are at your disposal. We have the schematics for his drive core. We will help you contain the blast. We will help you settle this account." A stunned silence fell over the Threshold's bridge. The mutineers were offering not just to stand down, but to stand with them. The lesson had been received, and the students were now ready to teach alongside their instructor. An open hand has been met with an open hand. Nomos Vance said, a wave of profound relief washing over him. "Integrate Captain Vorlog's squadron into our power grid. Give him control of the lattice's port stabilizers. We will hold this line together." The tactical display shifted the yellow icons of the Kiern cruisers, turning a brilliant cooperative green. A new network of energy surged into existence, human and Kiern systems intertwining, working in concert to achieve a single impossible goal. The deck plates of the Threshold began to vibrate with a new higher frequency, the thrum of a machine pushed beyond its intended limits, powered by the combined will of two former enemies. 3 minutes to detonation, Rostova announced, her voice a tense whisper. She was no longer a warrior, but a builder, a participant in the most audacious feat of astro-engineering ever attempted. "Steady the line for a future we will build together." The reflective lattice began to move, the tiny mirrors reorienting themselves with microscopic precision. They were no longer focusing light, but weaving a complex web of magnetic and gravimetric forces. Human ships anchored one side of the nascent field. Kiern cruisers anchored the other. The blind, dying dreadnought sat in the middle, a furious, incandescent bomb waiting to explode. The field is forming, but it's unstable. Lee warned, his face beaded with sweat, his eyes glued to the energy flow monitor. The feedback is immense. The Ghost is taking the brunt of the resonance cascade. The electronic warfare frigate positioned at a critical focusing node began to glow, its hull plates heating to a dull cherry red. The cost of this last great act of mercy was being paid by the ship that had turned the tide of the battle. A sacrifice is made not of life, but of strength. 1 minute Nomos counted down. Vance watched the main screen, his expression a mask of absolute concentration. He could feel the strain of the ship around him, the groan of stressed metal, the hiss of emergency coolant vents. He had chosen this path, the path of the teacher, the builder. He had refused to answer an ultimatum with another ultimatum. Now the universe would render its own verdict on his decision. Hold fast, he ordered, his voice echoing the name of his own destroyer. We are the shield. The final count begins. The white timer on the screen hit 0. For an instant there was only light. A silent, impossible sun bloomed in the void, a sun of pure, unrestrained energy born from the death of the dreadnought. It slammed into the containment field, an invisible wall of woven forces. The lattice flared, the tiny mirrors glowing white-hot as they bent the fury of a dying star around the fragile planet. On the threshold's bridge, every light flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in, bathing the crew in the dim red glow of backup systems. The ship groaned, a deep, wounded sound that vibrated through the deck into the very bones of everyone standing there. The inertial dampeners screamed, fighting to compensate for the gravimetric shockwave. The mirror holds against the storm. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The light did not vanish, but it was changed. The containment field had held. It had taken the chaotic, omnidirectional blast of the explosion and focused it, channeling the entire output of the detonating core into 2 impossibly tight, controlled beams, firing them harmlessly into the empty space above and below the plane of the solar system. Where the unwavering verdict had been, there was now nothing. The angry red icon was gone from the tactical display. The new sun had vanished. The only remnants of the crisis were the shimmering, beautiful aurora-like trails of dissipated energy that now painted the void and the deep, angry scars on the hull of the frigate Ghost. The ledger is closed, and the balance is peace. A cheer erupted on the bridge, a raw, human sound of disbelief and triumph. Rostova was gripping the edge of her console, her knuckles white. Lee was slumped in his chair, breathing heavily. Vance allowed himself a single deep breath, the tension of the last 72 hours finally draining from him. He had faced the abyss and had not blinked. Captain Vorlog's voice came over the comm, filled with a sense of awe. Admiral Vance, we have witnessed a new way. The mandate must know of this. The ledger must be made public. It will be, Captain Vance replied. It will be. A public record was transmitted across the Orion Arm, from the Kirin cruisers of the newly christened Vero squadron to the heart of the mandate. It contained the full tactical logs from both sides, the final desperate act of the unwavering verdict, and the unprecedented joint action that had saved a world. The doctrine of the ultimatum for so long, the bedrock of Kirin foreign policy, was formally declared a strategic failure, its continued practice suspended, pending a full review by the Mandate High Council. The precedent had been locked into the public record. The shimmering lattice of mirrors their purpose served cooled to a dull pewter gray before Nomos guided them back into their storage racks. The aurora from the vented energy began to fade, leaving the space above Vero calm and quiet. The green lights of the Allied Kirin ships were a new constellation in the planet's sky, a promise of a different kind of future. This is the power we offer the galaxy. Not the strength to break worlds, but the will to protect them. Not the fire of conquest, but the light of reason and the unyielding defense of life. We came here prepared to fight a war, but we chose instead to teach a lesson. And in doing so, we learned one ourselves that the hardest lines to hold are not in battle, but in the quiet moments where compassion is a choice. The ledger is balanced not with vengeance, but with the shared creation of a future that was once deemed impossible. We were given an ending. We forged a beginning.